Today we're going to be installing the Carli winch bumper on the Raptor Bronco, putting the winch in, putting the Baja design lights in, getting it all wired up to the truck, and getting the final assembled weight of this bumper before we put it on the truck. If you haven't already watched our previous video with the bumper review and initial fitment, be sure to check that out. We'll also be covering what we changed to make this bumper fit on a Raptor. Let's go ahead and get started by getting those sensors out of the factory bumper and the wiring harness figured out. This is the factory modular bumper for the Bronco. We took this off of our Raptor and we're going to be removing the wiring harness and the sonar sensors. Now Carli did provide with the bumper a color printout, really nice instructions, so we're not going to go blow by blow on how to do all this, but we're going to kind of give an overview on getting these sensors out and any sort of differences between the harness they provided, which is an OE harness, and the OE harness that comes with the Raptor, which is slightly different because there's driving lights and fog lights in this thing. So first thing, we're going to disassemble the structure here. It looks like we've got 4 bolts here to pull off this part of the structure, and then on the top we've got these torque style, looks like 2 or 3 here that we have to pull off, and we can get to the harness. So let's get that pulled off. Looks like you pulled apart the entire bumper.
Yes, I was very hopeful with the new wiring harness that we would not need to, but in order to get all the sensors out, you actually have to take it fully apart. The sensors are really easy to get out once you have access to them. However, as you can see, there's a pile of parts. We did compare the 2 harnesses to make sure we had all the correct wiring, and other than the fog light connectors, it looks like it's the same harness.
Yeah, basically it was nice that the harness was provided. That way we can potentially sell this bumper with the wiring harness included. However, to get out those sonar sensors, you have to take apart the entire bumper, so there's no time savings there.
No.
But it is kind of nice to have the extra harness. The harness is different between the Raptor and the standard Bronco because the Raptor has fog lights and driving lights, whereas the standard Bronco only has fog lights as an option. And I don't think that's going to affect us. We'll show you guys how we wire up all of the light portion of it, but all of the pinouts for the sonar sensors between the 2 harnesses are the exact same.
Yes.
So we're going to go ahead and reassemble all the bumper. We have the sonar sensors pulled out. I believe they're all the same for all the positions, but we're going to go ahead and mark them and put them in the exact same factory locations on the new bumper.
Better safe than having to recalibrate.
Yep. Assembling the center section is actually really well thought through. This cable pathway, they provided zip ties for, pre-cut out spots for the zip ties to go into, and then they have excellent pictures just to show how the cabling should run in that cable pathway. And so it has little slots for even the sonar sensor, and you can see this cable pathway. Essentially put all the zip ties in, lay the cabling in, and then get it positioned where you want, and then you can snug it all up. But wow, what a game changer to have really clean wiring, almost factory level wiring, especially with the included wiring harness. That's pretty fantastic. Now, the sonar sensors are also just a work of art as far as their retention system. These sensors, we're putting them back in the same location, so we just numbered them, so we made sure they go back in the same spot. The center section has 2 of these sensors in here, and before you put them on, you just pull out this little rubber grommet that's on it, and then they fit into this precision hole. And it's pretty incredible because a lot of times companies, when they build these parts, they don't account for the thickness of powder coating, and so then you got to put stuff in and it doesn't fit. But these are just perfect fit. You don't have to force it, and it's really snug. So from there, they use a little washer for a spacer on it, and then use a C-clip to hold it all in place. So it really well designed, thought through system here. So essentially you're going to get those 2 sonar sensors plugged in, all the cable routing, and then all the excess cable just going to kind of come out the ends of this bumper. So we will basically get that on, then set the winch in, get that bolted in, and then get the center section bolted on the truck and get the wings put on. But I think what we'll do is go ahead and get the winch on and then get a weight with the whole bumper assembled. So, all right, here's with the sensors installed. You can see amazing. Look how beautiful the wiring is with all the tie wraps. I love this. This is probably the most attention to detail I've seen from any aftermarket bumper supplier for just how they run all their cabling. And you can see on this side, the sensors just a little bit tucked in. The interesting thing is on these wings, they're almost completely flush, probably because this is 1/8 inch steel and this is 3/16. So they probably need to make their holster just a little differently between the two. But I think as long as it works fine, that will be great. But wow, 2 thumbs up between your instructions and the attention to detail on that. Fantastic. So let's see if that winch will set in here. We'll be using the Warn VR 10S, so it's a synthetic rope winch. The reason we went with the VR winch, a couple of reasons. One is it has the wireless controls built in. Not a huge fan of it being made in China, although Warn does warranty it pretty well. The advantage to it is it's significantly lighter than the Xeon series winch. We've owned a couple of those in vehicles as well, but weight is a big factor. So I think I'd love to see Warn build a premium winch like the 9.0 RC winch with updates like with this winch where it's waterproof with wireless controls, but with the objective of keeping the weight down, because a lot of us really do care about weight, and I'm willing to pay more money for less weight. So let's go ahead and get this thing fitted. One thing that's interesting with fitting this winch is that it's actually going to mount. So when you put it in the vehicle, the feet are going to go forward, basically like this. So this will be the front of the bumper like this, and it's going to bolt to the face of it. And the interesting thing is that the winch is more or less going to be facing downward. So this is the front of the winch. It's going to be facing downward because the fairlead's at the top. So when it spools, the rope's going to be coming in from the top. Kind of an interesting design idea. I'd be curious to know why they did that versus having the winch flip the other way and having the fairlead come in at the bottom. I don't know if it's a space constraint or what, but we're gonna go ahead and get this bolted in and we'll show you what it looks like with it sitting in there. With the winch installed, and like I was saying, this is the top of the bumper, this is the front of the bumper, and you can see that the winch is in essence facing downward when it's in the bumper, which is fine. It's just kind of an interesting thing. I will say the engineering for fitment is, wow, it's a lot to fit in a very small space, and just really nicely put together. Another thing that's kind of interesting is the intercooler airflow, kind of the snorkel from the bottom. It's not, you can see the air gap is not real big. I mean, it is going to deflect air into here. I was hoping that it was going to have a little better airflow with that, so we'll see how much that affects the intercooler's ability to cool. And I guess that would probably be an advantage if it was a smaller winch body like the 9.0 RC. It's just a smaller winch, there's just more room for airflow around there. I also think if the 9.0 had the control solenoid pack relocated elsewhere, that would even open up more airflow and then potentially could slide the bumper in closer, even an inch or two into the front grille would be really a nice thing. Another small thing that we saw on here, with the fairlead, these bolts work great. So they have provided 2 longer ones and 2 shorter ones. The longer ones are for the fairlead, and then the shorter ones are for the top of the winch, or it's the top of the winch, but when it's mounted, it's the bottom. But you can see there's a gap. So the bolts are bottoming out on the actual winch body inside before they actually get tight. So we're going to need to get a slightly shorter bolt for these. They're nice bolts though, grade 8 or grade 10 bolts. So really nice. So what we're going to do next is slide the end caps on and set the lights on here, and then throw it on a scale and see how much weight are we actually talking with it fully loaded what are we going to be adding to the vehicle. So we're going to go ahead and do that and get you a weight measurement. Our scale weight with the wings, all the bracketry, and all the lights, all the wiring, 148. So we added 65 pounds to the original weight that we took on this thing. That's not terrible, but you know, obviously every pound isn't great when it hangs over the front end of your truck. So it's probably one of the lightest setups that we could do with a winch bumper. I haven't found any combination that would be any lighter at this point, unless it was an aluminum bumper, and then I don't know that that would be strong enough to do the things we want to do with it. So let's see if we can get this thing fitted up and see what it looks like. Wait a second, the whole front end's pulled apart. What's going on there, girl?
Well, so we upgraded to the Whipple intercooler, and it is making contact with the top of the winch. So we're trying to move it back. However, it's so tight in here, we have very little room. So we're trying to figure that out.
So I think what we're gonna do is, this is the mount for the intercooler, the top mount, and you can see my little pen mark on there. I think what we're gonna do is enlarge the hole and then try to slide the intercooler back maybe ½ inch or so, and then we just don't want anything touching the intercooler, because when it's bouncing around and if it's rubbing on anything, that's not good. But
no.
Anyways, a little bit more work because we also have the frame reinforcement for the winch, so we had to remove that, the intercooler, the whole front. So simple.
Absolutely, no problem.
All right, so we installed it to test fit it again after modifying the top intercooler bracket, and now we've got a nice finger gap of clearance between the winch control pack and the intercooler. Still not a ton of room, but it's probably enough not to cause an issue. And if it does collide with it, hopefully it would be not too crazy, because the intercooler is on rubber bushing, so it will flex a little bit. But it's tight fit. So if you do an aftermarket Whipple intercooler like we did, prepare to do more modifications. The next thing we'll be working on is that Metaltech frame reinforcement bracket. It needs a little bit of modification just so that way it sits really flush with the front factory frame horn. You don't want any gap on it, and so we'll make sure that that all can fit up with our modified bracket. And then final assembly. So we'll go in and we'll give you an update here. All right, the installation sequence that worked best for us was to do the front bolts that secure the reinforcement to the front flange. That keeps it in alignment, and it also keeps it very sandwich tight. And then from there we had all of the hardware put in loosely. So all the bolts kind of loosely tightened. And then we tightened the far back one on the frame first, and then we tightened the through bolt going through the frame second, and then we tightened up the top flange bolt last. And in theory then, it's all in alignment and it's tight, so when we pull these bolts out, it'll all be in alignment and we'll be able to put that bumper on. Now we did replace these bolts. Our other bolts we'd taken in and out so many times for all the different projects that they're kind of getting a little bit worn on the threads. So these are the same metric 10.9 grade rating bolts. They're 35 mil, so a little shorter, a little more reasonable. And then we have flange nuts on the back side, and so we're removing the stock plate that used to be there. And I think this will be a little bit better for just putting in and out. And they're very expensive at the hardware store, but I think we definitely want to keep our winch bumper attached. Our new bolts worked fantastic. So these are a 10.9 35 millimeter bolts, and they're an M12, and they have a flange nut on the back side that has little biting teeth, so you don't even have to hold the back nut. It worked really nice. And these are torqued to 80 foot-pounds. This is where I think Carli's engineering is once again proving itself. Obviously these inside bolts, the two inside ones, are very difficult to get to with a enclosed bumper like this. However, with the wing off, you can fit a torque wrench just barely and you can actually torque it down. So I guess once again, their engineers figured this thing out. Pretty cool. So we're going to be doing the wings next. Faith has started to assemble that side, and it's very tight, so we're going to use a shorty wrench to get it snugged up, and then tighten them up a bit more. And then we'll be working on getting the lights in and routing all the wires. This part is where it's best to have two people. Once the winch is loaded into the center section, you want to set it up onto the bumper and run in those 3 bolts on each side. I would leave them all just loose enough to where it can still adjust, and then put a floor jack underneath of it, and that way you can precision set the height and also set the side to side. We learned from assembling this, looking like it was centered on here, then put on the bumper ends and it was off by about 1/8 of an inch. So I think the best thing to do is to loosely put the bumper ends on, adjust it side to side where you like it, snug up the mounting bolts to the frame for the center section, and then put the wings back on. So it's a little bit of a back and forth deal to get it centered properly, and there's probably a little bit more play with the standard Bronco, but with the Raptor, how the wings and this bottom trim piece is, it's a fairly tight tolerance on it. But we've put on and off the wing several times, and we're getting more proficient at it. All right, with the 3 center section mounting bolts loose, we were able to attach these wings, and we just snugged up the 1 bolt. I think it's this one right here. That is the easiest one to get at. All the rest of them require a shorty wrench. And so with these wings pushed all the way back, snugged up, you can see our gap here now. And what we try to do is match it to either side, both to the body as well as out, going in and out. And then the elevation on it, we dropped it just down so our cabling, you can see the winch cabling does not contact the plastic trim piece anymore. So we want it as high as possible, but we wanted it to basically be able to have clearance. Nice thing with the bumper, with this light out, you can reach this outside frame mount bolt and snug that up to hold the center section in place. So once you're good with the positioning on that center section, snug up the outside frame bolts and then pull off the wings, and you can torque all 6 of those frame mount bolts down. I believe it's right about 80 foot-pounds on it, and then finally put on the wings and just get them as tight as you can with the limited space available. So we're going to go ahead and get these wings off, get the bolts torqued, put these wings back on, and then we'll pick up with putting the lights in. All right, the XL80s have a Carli supplied bracket, which is a very nice piece. It has nut certs to make it easier to install. There is a small adjustment on it, which if you really want them aimed probably like what we did, is had these bolts snug enough to adjust them and have it stay. We bolted it in, adjusted it, pulled it back out, tighten these bolts up. The other thing is that you can see the mounting bracket is horizontal instead of vertical, which means the lens is incorrect. It's now sideways. So you actually have to loosen and take off the 4 Allen bolts and rotate the lens and the front housing so it's all in the correct orientation. And you'll need to do that on both sides. All right, XL80 lights are installed, and the S2 lights, and these are one of those deals where you have to install, adjust, in, out if you want it all aligned how you like it to be. It is best to have 2 people with most all of this project here, and you just have to be willing to take your time, make sure all your cables are routed all nice and neat in all the wire management. They did provide plenty of tie wraps, which is really helpful. I'll show you how we're routing our power connections for the winch and the lighting into the truck. So let's take a look at that. All right, so all of the wiring we're gonna run behind the fender liner, and it's really best, in my opinion, to just pull the fender liner out so you can get a really nice clean routing for your cabling. Now you'll notice this is the winch wiring here, and it's the more heavy gauge. I'm guessing it's 6 gauge or so wiring. And you can see the positive wire, we put the expandable wire sheathing on it just to give it a little bit more protection. And then they're tie wrapped together probably every 6 or 8 inches just to keep them nicely, neatly bundled. And then they route up into the engine compartment, behind the fender liner. This wire here is the power wire for the wiring harness for both the XL80 and the S2 light from Carli, and they're labeled with a ground. So this would just go to a chassis ground, and then these, the easy way to do it is just wire these to your auxiliary switches, and that's located right up here behind the fuse panel. So you just create a nice little wire path for that. So if we look up here in the engine compartment, you'll want to refer to your owner's manual for the auxiliary switch wiring, but you'll find that all tucked up right in here, and the manual will tell you which color codes go to which switches, and that's a crucial thing. I'll put a link below for a link to the manual, and we'll be using auxiliary 1 and auxiliary 2 on this for our application. Now the wiring for the winch is going to go straight up to the battery. So you can see our positive, we're using this existing terminal stud here, and our negative is going straight to the battery here. Now a lot of people like to add additional disconnects and fusing and so forth for the winch. I would say just use caution with that. Anytime you add resistance to a high amperage draw like the winch, you can actually increase the amperage and create excessive heat from the extra resistance. So just be really careful with that. I think the best thing to do is run it straight to the battery, and then just make sure you're protecting your cabling, have really good wire management on all your cabling. Let's go ahead and just take a look at the bumper real quick, and we'll just go over final thoughts on it. Carli bumper is installed, and a few thoughts on the installation. Number one, it's really helpful if you have a helper. There's a lot to hold, adjust, position on this bumper, and it is fairly time consuming. I'd say give it a full day to do the project. Maybe 2, just to add time for the winch install and all the wiring, and just take your time with it. You want to make sure all of your routing, cable management is all really clean and nicely done, and obviously you want to be installing all of your lights at the same time. That'll be a big help. Now a few thoughts on the bumper that I didn't initially think of is the air intercooler. We talked about the air scoop being a really neat feature of this bumper. And I kind of wish the air scoop sat just a little bit lower, just because the bottom of the intercooler is probably a good 1.5 inches underneath where the bottom of the air scoop is. So I think it'd make the air scoop slightly more effective if it was slightly lower. The top 1 inch of the intercooler is blocked by the winch control pack. Now it is pretty amazing that you can put this whole VR 10S winch in with the control pack in place. Because of this Whipple intercooler, we did have to reposition it back slightly by modifying the upper mount, but otherwise we had good clearance there. Now another thing that I didn't really think of with the Carli bumper was anti-theft, and this is I don't know all their engineering on this or if it's just how it worked out, but it's pretty incredible. So the winch itself is held to the face of the bumper with 4 bolts like a standard winch mount. However, you can't get the winch out because of this air scoop. So essentially you have to have the center section completely unbolted from the truck to get the winch removed from the vehicle. However, to get this center section out, you actually have to unbolt the wings of the bumper, because the bolts for the bumper mounts are blocked by the wings. In order to get the wings out, you actually have to take these S2 lights out on the side, and then you have to unbolt these XL80 lights to then get to the bolts for the wings. So in essence, even if somebody wanted to steal, let's say the XL80 lights, there's no way to reach any of the bolts or mounting for it unless you understand how this bumper is assembled, which means you'd have to take out the S2 lights first. It's very time consuming, and realistically, it's probably unlikely that somebody's going to steal, or get to, steal the lights or the winch or really any part of this bumper because of how integrated and well designed it is. It's hard to even know where to start with something like this. Now, a few other thoughts on the bumper. I still think that these wing sections would benefit from being a little heavier duty steel, maybe like 3/16 like these center section here. I do think they slotted all 4 of the bolt mounts for it. I think it'd be beneficial if only maybe 3 or even 2 of them were slotted, if you could get the bolts started, just because I wouldn't want to see it to move, like if it got impacted. And I'm a little concerned about that because they tapered it in so tight, especially like this little corner area of the truck. If we run this into a boulder or a tree or something like that, I'm concerned that it will hit the headlight and that this corner isn't going to hold up to a whole lot of impact. I guess time will tell with that, and we'll keep you guys posted with it. I think they did it for mostly cosmetic and clearance design, which is quite good with this bumper. It's amazing how tucked in this bumper is for such a large winch in there. Anyways, go ahead and share your thoughts or questions and comments down below. I'd love to hear what you guys like and don't like with this bumper. Obviously, cosmetics are all subjective, but I like to focus mostly on functionality with the winch, and I will say that compared to the pictures I've seen online for this bumper, it looks massively nicer in person and installed on the vehicle. So I don't know if that's just from working with it for long enough or it's just grown on me, but it is a nice design for that. So thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for our next video because we'll show how we're going to wire up these lights, because we're not going to do a traditional wire straight up into the auxiliary switches. We're going to have these have the ability, the XL80s, to come on and off with the brights and or the auxiliary switch, so it'll give it multifunctionality, and we'll show you how we're going to wire that up. So stay tuned for that. That'll be in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you guys later.